Afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started right about now. Guys, hello. Everyone, we're going to get started on today's BAFTA producing panel right now because this is an incredibly packed panel. We've got a lot of speakers to talk to. Given this is the producing panel, though, it's going to be run like clockwork. It's going to be a very tight ship indeed, I'm sure. We're going to start with three nominees from the Outstanding Debut category. We have Sophie Harman, Jacqui Davies, and Kristian Brodie. All three of you were working with first-time directors for the films you've been nominated for, Pili, Ray and Liz and Beast. And you've all come to these filmmakers in completely different routes. And Sophie, I'd like to start by asking you, because you were really the originator of the idea for Pili, which is quite unusual, I think, particularly for a directorial debut. So can you talk us through this kind of wealth of material that you'd already amassed and why it was that you wanted to pass it to a director and approach it that way rather than a documentary or more research or something like that?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So Pili was the culmination of 10 years of my research. So I'm actually an academic. I'm a professor of international politics and I specialise on HIV and AIDS. And for years, I was getting so annoyed because films on HIV and AIDS tend to be social histories from the 1980s. And they don't really encounter what AIDS looks like today. And that is the majority of people living with HIV live in sub-Saharan Africa. We don't really see their stories. So I thought, okay, I have no experience of filmmaking. Let's make a film. And that worked out quite well. And fortunately, that was because I met the incredibly talented director, Leanne Wellham. And I said, look, I've got this plan. And instead of running a mile from a first-time producer, she was like, yeah, all right then, let's give it a go. And the drama aspect came for a couple of reasons. Firstly is because our cast are actually real people. We only have one trained actor. 65% live with HIV. So 65% of them live with HIV, sorry. So they could inhabit a character. So instead of a documentary where you're like, okay, we're going to expose you and tell you about your life, they could say, so Bello, who plays Pili, when the kind of film goes back to Tanzania, she's like, well, that wasn't me, it's Pili. So it allows them to inhabit a character. Also allows them to explore the story themselves. So say, okay, you all want this in your life to make your life better, get out of manual labour, own your own business, let's see what happens. So it was kind of exploratory in the drama in that sense. And also, more people in sub-Saharan Africa watch dramas than documentaries. If you said to someone, do you want to watch, in Tanzania, do you want to watch a documentary about the everyday risks of AIDS? They'd be like, no, that sounds awful. Whereas if you said, hey, do you want to watch about a story about this one woman that you see all the time in the Shamba? Do you want to follow her life? Yeah, so audience, ethics, all that kind of stuff.
And in terms of finding your director, Leanne, she had experience in working in Tanzania before, right? Or certainly in Africa?
So more in West Africa. So we met actually because of Ebola, bizarrely. So I'd been in Sierra Leone during the Ebola outbreak. This is so tangential. Looking at the roles of militaries. And I met someone she was working with on another film about Sierra Leone runners. And so when I came back to the UK, I thought, oh, let's meet this interesting director. Then I got the financing for the film. So it all kind of fit together. And I knew she had also experience of working in Africa, which was hugely important. Also because, you know, I was looking for also African directors as well at the time for that kind of balance too. So it just kind of worked. She got it, really. And I think we had a good Lennon-McCartney relationship. Just why not compare ourselves to those greats? Just going to do it. I've said it now.
Was the financing easier to secure because it was a drama? Because I would have thought from a UK perspective, a documentary is much more of an obvious route to have gone down. Did you find any resistance to the fact when you were trying to get the money?
Our funders were great. So it was funded by a research project. So anyone who's looking for film funding, find an academic because we can get money. Not much though. So our whole project was meant to be, you know, initially thinking about a documentary. The whole film was made for £75,000. So getting the money was fine. Obviously, I was like, yeah, this is fine. And Leanne's like, this is ridiculous. But we made it work. We called in loads of favours. And I think part of that is because all the money that the film makes is going back to the cast. So I'm not making a dime off this film. So that gives you favours. When you say, look, it's going back to women living on less than $2 a day, people will put in favours to make it work.
Jacqui, by contrast, you're working with a filmmaker whose material could not have been more personal and specific to him. And you've worked with Richard Billingham for a number of projects, right? Because you did stuff with him for Random Acts, and he did the short Ray before the idea became Ray and Liz. Can you talk us about your working relationship with Richard, and how, particularly given that you've worked with artists and that kind of the intersection point of film and art, how you can suss out whether a project is going to work as a feature or whether it would work better as an installation or film art or something different?
Yeah, I've worked, or I've had an interest and worked in the art world for a very long time. I went to art school, I didn't go to film school. When I moved to London 10,000 years ago, I started helping a friend to make videos and installations, because he just wasn't sure how to do things. So we would discuss them, and we'd work out actually what it could be and how to do it. So I sort of started producing, I guess, by accident. And I met Richard about 9 or 10 years ago now at one of his exhibitions, and we started talking about a work that he wanted to make. Richard Billingham was hugely famous very quickly in the 90s for a body of work that he made about his family. And he was very young when he took these first photographs. So he sort of exploded onto the scene and became very quickly assimilated into what was seen as the YBAs, the young British artists that really, really shifted certainly the art world in this country, and then actually had a big impact internationally as well. And he was in the Sensation show, actually, at the Royal Academy across the road, which was kind of Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin, and very kind of big, bold, kind of, in a sense, egotistical, quite loud work. And Richard's body of work, which in one sense fitted with that, because it was difficult, it was kind of in your face, and that was the way it was marketed, as the sensational work. And from that time I felt quite clear that the work didn't really fit into that context. Anyway, so when I met Richard and he started talking about wanting to make something around his dad and this experience of this one period of time where his dad kind of isolated himself in his room and drank. His mum, Richard's mum, had left. Richard was living in the next door room, and his dad basically just went into kind of isolation. And Richard had never made anything that wasn't simply documenting what was in front of him and just responding. And his huge talent, I always felt, was framing. He could frame something in a single image which gave you a sense of some story. You didn't know what it was, but you could feel it. You could feel it in the kind of correspondence between the people and the objects within the frame. So it was a very, very slow process from that to we made a single screen installation for a gallery, which was very minimal, simple. It was really his dad in this room, but with an actor, which was a huge step, I think, for Richard to take. And when we were doing that, these other two stories began to emerge, and I didn't feel that they could fit into a gallery context at all, because they were narrative. They were still based on Richard's memory, but in a less ephemeral way, in a more kind of dramatic way, I suppose. And we sort of just roughly edited these three stories together, and I sent them to somebody that I trust a lot, and said, I think this is a feature. And they was really excited about it. So yeah, that sort of gave me the sort of little dot of more impetus that I needed to start talking to people that I didn't really know very well, which is film financiers and those people.
I don't know how familiar everyone is with Richard's photography, but there's this incredible specificity to the place, this
Yes.
flat that everything kind of pans out in, from the wallpaper, the furnishings, everything. How painstakingly was that recreated? I mean, were you shooting on a location? Was it recreated on a set? And what was getting the details of that
Oh,
Right.
Richard and I used to travel to the film is set in a place called Cradley Heath, which is a small kind of satellite village, really, of Birmingham, and a little bit in Dudley, which is another little bit further away. And we used to travel up there and just go and look around and talk about things about making this film. And when we went to the flat building that he grew up in, it was clear to me that he wouldn't be able to shoot on location, and he would not be able to make the shift. He couldn't really have. I don't think he himself could have believed it. So basically, we then set about trying to get a flat in the same building that he grew up in. So one part of the film is shot on the same floor where Richard grew up. And it was just totally clear that it had to be like that. And we had to do it in a really funny way. I had to rent the flat, basically, which was very, very painful, trying to get the gas turned on and everything. But yeah, it just had to be that way. Also, I think it was about like odd things, like about scale and how somebody moved in a space and things like that. And I knew that on a set, Richard would have been too... I think flummoxed by the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it worked out really well in the end. And we used the photographs, of course, to reconstruct the spaces. So it became a kind of wealth of knowledge for other people, for the production designers, for the people buying props, for everybody to be able to understand what those surfaces were, how they were built up, and the kinds of wallpapers and kinds of patina and kind of dirt and stuff that they could see from the photographs.
Mm-hmm. Kristian, on that thought of shooting on location, as one of two of this year's Channel Islands films, you were the only one to have actually shot on the Channel Islands, right? Because I think the Guernsey Literary Potato Bill Pie Society, they had to shoot on the mainland because the logistics just weren't there.
Yeah, I wish we'd known that before. We did know
how tricky was it to shoot out on Jersey?
It was tricky for two reasons. Mainly, the first being financial. Jersey's not a part of the UK in terms of qualifying for the tax credit, and our film relied, as most British films rely quite heavily on the tax credit for their funding. So we knew we couldn't shoot all of it there because we wouldn't be able to afford to. But Michael was very, very insistent. Michael Pierce, the director of the film, grew up in Jersey. He told the story very much from a physical perspective in terms of where everything happened. Everything was mapped out for him. So he knew that there were certain things that needed to be there. So we ended up managing to somehow make it work for a week, that we would end up with the last week of the shoot in Jersey. And it was tough. There was nothing there in terms of support for production. There was very little, obviously no camera houses or anything like that, so we had to bring everything with us and enough to make it, if anything went wrong, we wouldn't have anyone to kind of repair anything for us there. There wasn't a great deal of location support. We were using people who, to a great degree were very helpful, but also that wasn't their job to set up film crews and so on. So it was all a little bit haphazard. We were staying in quite a terrible hotel. Most of us, I think we brought the average age of the hotel down by about 50 years, quite comfortably. And doing it at the end of the shoot, we thought was the smart thing to do, because by that point we'd all be bonded as a team and as a crew, and we were ready to, to take on this last challenge. The reality was, after 4 weeks of previous shoot, we were just tired, and it was just that little bit of extra stress to kind of get it over the line. But
in terms of securing funding for the film, how useful was it to have this genre angle to peg it to? Because in a sense, I mean, it's much more than this, but in a sense it's a murder mystery at the absolute core of the film.
No, totally. I think that was definitely why I got excited about the idea the first time I met Michael. Was I'd actually fallen into producing by accident. I'd worked in sales for years before that, so I'd always, I suppose, had an idea of the market in my mind in terms of anything that we were going to do as producers. And I liked that Michael came from very much a cinephile background. Like, he's an NFTS graduate, made two, by the time we first met, one BAFTA nominated short, and then while we were working on Beast, a second one, and clearly knew cinema. At the same time, we were telling a story that was totally hook laden, easy to pitch, easy to understand what it was, and to be honest with you, this is very much my personal perspective, I was very keen to avoid just the kind of lazy social realist route of grim cinema that I think can kind of be fallen into a little bit from emerging filmmakers here in the UK, certainly back at the time we started working on it. But our financing came through public bodies, through BFI and Film 4. BFI came on board first, and I think they definitely saw that, but I think they mainly saw Michael's skill as a director as a reason to invest in the film, and I think Film 4 probably echoed that with maybe a little bit more of the kind of the commercial opportunities that the film offered as well there.
I want to ask you very quickly, we're running quite tight for time, but I want to ask you about casting, because in all three respects you've pulled off some amazing coups. Jacqui, if I can start by asking you about Deirdre Kelly, who is not kind of intuitive, I don't think, casting for any filmmaker, let alone a first-time filmmaker. Deirdre was in a, what would you, it's like a kind of a fly on the wall series.
Fly on the Wall. There was a reality TV show on Channel 4 called Benefit Street, where they basically followed around people who were living on benefits and poor and entertaining to people who weren't living on benefits and in their nice, comfy houses, I think. Pretty grim.
They tried to pitch it differently, but
they pitched it differently, but that's how it seemed to me. Yeah.
So what was it about Deirdre that had you seen her on the show and thought she's someone to bear in mind for?
I hadn't really watched the show, but I had caught some glimpses of her, and it was really even more kind of bonkers because Richard and I talked about her, but at that point he was quite worried. She only has a quite small part, but he was quite worried about working with people who hadn't acted before, especially as he hadn't directed before. And then she went, I saw an Evening Standard, which is the local paper for anyone who's not from here, and there was a picture of her dressed really smartly and going into the Big Brother house, which is another reality show, where she was pretending to be a duchess or something. And I just thought it was amazing. And I remember I was traveling somewhere and I just tore the front of the paper off and photographed it and sent it to Richard, and I said, she's Liz. I just, because it was amazing. Just seeing her kind of rise to that occasion, I just thought, oh, she's amazing. And she has an astonishingly great voice. She is local, she comes from the same place, and I think that later Richard could see that, like, his mum might actually, because she played Richard's mum, his mum might actually have been a bit like that, had someone come round and said, we want to make a TV show about you living in this tower block. She may well have done that, and she may well have been a bit like Dee, who is a great character. So that was really the Dee situation. And our first meeting was in McDonald's drive-through in Birmingham, which was the most surreal and like great meeting, because it's like we just hung around in the drive-through until she turned up, and then she was quite famous with some of the people in the McDonald's. So it was really, really surreal, but she was really great, really lovely.
Sophie, you were working with non-actors. Was there a casting call, or did you kind of go out and speak to people one-to-one in clinics, and what was the...
Yeah, so the story of Pili is actually derived by over 80 women's story who Leanne and I met with in this very small region, or a very small town in Tanzania, and then we cast from those meetings, except for Bello behind us, who we'd met all these amazing women, and obviously I was like, oh, they're all amazing. Leanne was like, no, they have to hold a film for 80 plus minutes. They've got to be engaging. I was like, oh, okay. And so we had someone in mind to play Pili, but she was a bit nervous. And then she brought her sister along to the casting, because we were doing some workshops, and we were like, oh, wow, she can take direction. She could read, so quite a few members of our cast had problems reading, so when we had a script, it was all improvised mainly. And then we did lots of casting on the spot. So, you know, if people didn't turn up, if we had someone who had to play the field manager, we ended up having a field boss who I'd been arguing with 10 minutes beforehand, because he was trying to get more money for hiring the film. I was laughing at your Guernsey problems. I was like, I was working in dollars, Tanzanian shillings. Everything had to be paid in cash. All money was in my bra at all times. We had no backup plan. Our director of photography's toilet stopped working for about 2 weeks, and he handled it bravely. And I was like, anyway, so the casting was very much like at the time, on the time, and the cast helped us. So we would say, right, we need someone to play the local gossip. They were like, Sarah Zurio, see if she's free. So it was really fun, yeah.
And Kristian, if I can quickly ask you about Jessie Buckley as well, because Beast was such a kind of a launch pad, I think, for her career. Now she's gone on to Wild Rose and other things too.
Oh no. Well, I mean, we owe. I guess Jessie's casting in the film to two elements. One being, I guess, BFI and Film 4, our financiers, recognising that we didn't need to have a name in the role, which was very important creatively, I think, not to have somebody come into that role with baggage of another, recognisably another actress. And then also we had a fantastic casting agent in Julie Harkin, who's the best in the business. I think she knew immediately that Jessie was somebody we should look at, and we read, we did the job, like we interviewed and auditioned a lot of people, but Jessie just stood out from the get-go, and then was just an absolute pleasure to work with throughout the film. A lot of fun, very chilled. She would be able to go from messing around with our third AD to like screaming in anger in the role, and cut, and then she'd mess around again. Just like that ability to switch was just insane, and she's a real pleasure to work with.
Speaking of an ability to switch, shall we give this a go? Thank you very much for outstanding debut. Thank you. Yeah, sure, of course. Do you want them in any order? Any order that works, really. Okay, so now introducing, in no particular order, Ed Guiney, producer of The Favourite, Gabby Rodriguez, producer of Roma, Tanya Seghatchian, producer of Cold War, Bill Gerber and Lynette Howell Taylor, producers of A Star Is Born. Yeah, do you want me to move one further down? Yeah, that works. Yes, please. Of course, yeah.
So many.
That's okay. Yeah, sure. Of course.
All right, folks. Nice one.
Okay, that was pretty smooth. Can I just ask you all to, if we can go down the line, you can all introduce yourselves again, because I did that too early.
Lynette Howell Taylor, one of the producers of A Star Is Born.
Bill Gerber, Star Is Born.
Tanya Seghatchian, Cold War.
Gabriela Rodriguez, Roma.
Ed Guiney, The Favourite.
Okay, congratulations first of all on an incredible suite of films. It's great to have you all here today. Ed, if I can start by asking you about your working history with Yorgos Lanthimos. Your first film together was The Lobster, right? So did you come onto that as a result of them looking for locations in Ireland? Was that your sort of specialty area, or how did you get involved with that? And then how did your relationship with Yorgos go from that to Sacred Deer and then now to The Favourite?
Well, it started with The Favourite, actually, because we were developing that with CC Dempsey, one of the other producers, and Lee Magaday, who's a colleague of mine who worked for Element back then. And we were looking for a filmmaker to come onto that script and that story, and Dogtooth was a thing back then. And we met Yorgos, and he liked the idea, and he came onto the film. So that's how we first met. And then he was living in Greece at that time. Then he moved to the UK and decided he wanted to make films in English and work with actors in the English language. And he pitched us the idea for The Lobster, which he and Efthimis, his co-writer, had kind of written page-and-a-half pitch, which actually is, scarily resembles the finished film. I mean, which is that's a repeated pattern with Yorgos. And we had slate funding money from media, from the European Media Project. So we commissioned a script from Yorgos and Efthimis at that time. And then we made that film, and we were building The Favourite alongside it. And it went very well, and got Yorgos more and more attention. And we had intended to do The Favourite as the next film, but just because of the sort of logistics around casting, with actresses of that sort of stature, they obviously have a lot of things going on in their lives. So it took us a moment to find a time when everyone was aligned, and so we'd intended to shoot the film in spring of 2016, but then Emma did something else, and then Olivia wasn't available, so we had a kind of a year we postponed it for a year, and we had been developing Killing of Sacred Deer with Yorgos, and he said, can we try and make it? And I was like, I doubt it, but we'll give it a go. And so then we made Sacred Deer in that year that we were waiting for The Favourite. So it started with The Favourite, and we've made 3 films together since. So.
It's incredible to me that of those 3 films, that The Favourite would be the tricky one. Because it seems, I remember talking to Yorgos about this when Sacred Deer came out, and saying, because it was in the air that The Favourite was going to be his next project then. And it kind of sounded like it could have been almost a director for hire piece. And he just was like, nope. And it obviously it didn't go on to become that in the slightest. But it's amazing that something that's relatively conventional in that it's a costume drama. It's got a famous cast, and it's this part of British history. That kind of seems like the no-brainer for the one that will just fly off the blocks.
Well, the story's been told many times, but Cece, who we produced it with, was developing it for 10 years before it came to us, and then it took us another 10 years to get it going. And actually, a lot of that was finding the tone of the film, because we didn't want to make just another British costume drama. As you say, that's a sort of, in a way, a well-worn genre. And Yorgos definitely wanted to do something else with it. And to do something that was surprising and different, and just not what you'd expect, and so it just took us a while to find the tone. And when we found the tone, in other words, kind of had a script that was sort of that was represented the film you wanted to make, it actually there was an awful lot of interest in it. So there was a lot of options for getting it financed. But it was really then about finding the right cast that could support the budget that he needed to make the film. And at that point, Emma Stone, obviously being a very, very well-known actress, really helped us kind of support the budget that we needed.
Mm. Gabby, in terms of labours of love, I think Roma absolutely qualifies as one of these long-running directorial passion projects. And I'm interested why Alfonso Cuarón wanted to make it after Gravity. If there was suddenly some kind of that film changed things, it made making that film possible, given it was going to be non-English language, given it was going to be in black and white?
Well, I think it's a combination of 2 things. One, he says, and I've heard him say, that he felt he was mature enough and ready to face that truth about going deep in those memories. On the other hand, he wanted the total freedom of having the financing, limited as it was, but without external interference. And in order to do that, I think he, after Gravity and that being a success, he felt like now's the chance where I can actually go ahead and do this. And that's why he got away without sharing a script and everything else that he made us go through.
Can you explain a little bit about this not sharing of the script? I don't know if everyone familiar with this. But
he wrote a beautiful, beautiful script, which I read after we had wrapped the film. He did not share it with anyone. He did not share it with anyone. David Lindy, the president of Participant, he co-financed the movie. Alfonso financed part of it, and Participant Media the other half. And David kept telling Alfonso, okay, so I'll give you X amount of money, but I need to show that there's something, a script. And Alfonso's like, fine. So he wrote something and gave it to him in Spanish. And David doesn't speak Spanish, so here's the script. Go figure it out. So I think that this was, now in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, it was a beautiful adventure. While we were making it, we all wanted to like kill him for not giving us the script. And after a while, we did a really long pre-production. So after a while, I think we all like embraced that this is how it was going to be, and it was just about asking him all the time, what do you want here, what do you want here.
How did you schedule the movie?
Well, how do we budget the movie? I mean, like everything, like scheduling. It was he broke down scenes by dates. So it would say like November, whatever, this is what happens. But then there were some times when we would get to set, or let's say like a week before shooting a scene, and we'd like, oh no, this one should be easy. It's just interior house, sofa, family. And it turns out it's like hail, 360 shot, you know, like all the kids in the family. We had to do 65 takes. I mean, it was they would grow and you just didn't know. Or fire, exterior, you know, forest. And you're like, okay. You didn't know. How do you know, he wanted to light the entire fire sequence with real fire. So the special effects guy was, I don't know how long the take is going to be. I don't know how much tanks I need to bring, how much fire to keep the fire going at the same intensity for. So it was, you know, there were like little surprises. I mean, we would have probably had surprises even if he had given us a script. But I think this was his way of, yeah, I know, you know. But this was a way, I guess, for him to be like, well, just you're all in this adventure with me, and let's, you know, I didn't tell you it was going to be this way. I just didn't tell you anything. So. Well,
actually, Tanya, on that very point, that kind of sense of, I mean, there's this real kind of. In both films, this kind of visionary immersiveness to some of these historical period settings. And one of the shots that really sticks with me from Cold War is that movement towards the East Berlin, West Berlin border. And it's so kind of all-enveloping. It's hard to tell in retrospect how much was there and how much was kind of just breathed into it, you know, by imagination. So can you tell us about staging those kind of things? How tricky was it to recreate the period setting and just for it to look so meticulous and so natural?
Well, that shot was it was probably one of the most complicated shots Pavel did, because very little of it was there. So it was shot over several different bits of location and included some effects work that is not common in his kind of filmmaking. And you know, required a huge amount of production design and recreation, all of which was done in Poland, not in Germany. So actually that moment in the film is a film which is probably quite uncharacteristic of the way in which Pavel works, but on the other hand, it's one of the fundamental scenes in the film because it's the border crossing in a film about borders, and at a time when there wasn't really a wall. So everyone now looking back at the film will think, well, hold on, it can't possibly have been that simple. But it was. You just walked across and there was a sign and a small checkpoint. And it was only later that the wall came up and it became harder. So I think that sense of, well, how much do you show to an audience now who would look back at that period and possibly think it must have looked like that, and how truthful are you to what the experience was like then, was something that we were trying to strike the balance on. And then obviously it's a complicated waiting shot, and we couldn't find the right location, so we had to shoot it over different places and in different places, and a lot of artwork had to go into it too.
You've had this incredibly diverse career in that you worked at the David Heyman Hit Factory and then the UK Film Council Film Fund, and I'm wondering what those two different perspectives did you know, which was the more useful in piecing together Cold War?
Well, I started with Pavel, actually. I mean,
with the My Summer of Love.
But before that, I when I was a student at university, I saw Pavel's first documentary on television, and I'm his original stalker. I wrote his name down on a piece of paper and decided I wanted to work with him, but because he was always filming documentaries in foreign countries, it took me 3 years to find him. When I did find him, fate had thrown the two of us together in an office in the BBC, and I didn't know I was going to be sharing it with him, but they gave me an office, and the man in the office was Pavel. So, and then we became friends and professional colleagues, but the Warner Brothers Harry Potter experience is actually thanks to this man sitting here, who was the person at Warner Brothers who was really interested, alongside Lionel Wigram, in the Harry Potter book, which I gave David, which David gave to the studio way back when, 20 years ago. And so
David has made your life amazing since then. Got you a big mansion.
So I left Harry Potter to do public service at the Film Council, which was great, and it meant I could work with people like Ed, and I met Gabby through working with Alfonso on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. So the one thing I could say about my eclectic career, and I so admire Lynette, that this is really a great moment for me, is that I've worked with all these people, and I can tell you, they are amazing. When I got stuck on Cold War, I rang his company and said, how the hell would you put films together in Europe? If I get stuck on anything, I ring her. She fixes it within 5 seconds. You know, I'm not lucky enough to have experienced direct working relationships with them. But
You're young.
It's really hard making these things, and in England, we stick together and we help each other. So it's very nice to be.
On that same kind of collaborative note, Bill and Lynette, A Star Is Born has gone through so many different iterations. And at what point did you each become attached to the film? And tell us about shepherding it to its final form with Bradley directing and starring, and with Lady Gaga and the co-starring with him.
I'm just marveling at your story about no script, and we basically had a new script a day, and would get up very early and think, oh, is there an email that we need to read quickly? You know, new pages and all that. It was like. My story on A Star Is Born actually began a long time ago, actually back in almost pre-Harry Potter days, because I was an executive at Warner's from '86 to '98, and you know, I tell people often, because it's such a great story and somewhat applicable to any kind of musical genre, every time you know, a woman would break, you know, whether it was Alicia Keys or it was Lauryn Hill or it was whomever, you know, we'd always say, well, you know, Aaliyah, maybe we should do A Star Is Born with, you know, Whitney Houston, you know. So the title came up from time to time, and it was always a good idea. We just never got the great scripts, and then it would go back into development. And then when I started my production company in '98, made a few films, and then around 2006, I was talking with the music producer David Foster, you know, who's a friend, and we were talking about, you know, trying to do a music film together, and he said, you know, you should just do A Star Is Born. That's the best. And I said, it's funny you should say that. You know, we've talked about it over the years. And so I went to Courtney Valenti at the studio, and I suggested we redevelop it, and so we went through a lot of iterations up until around 2013, when Clint Eastwood was meant to direct it, and we thought, and Beyonce was going to play the female lead, and we thought Bradley would be great, and so Warner's put us together with Bradley, who Lynette had worked with previously and plays Beyond the Pines, and we really wanted him to do it. I mean, we really thought, okay, let's go make this movie. And then Elephant Man came up, and the Super Bowl came up for Beyonce, and then, you know, everybody kind of went their separate ways, and all of a sudden Clint went off into Jersey Boys, and I'm the lone person still sitting there with the, you know, aren't we making A Star Is Born? So anyway, Bradley came back around a year later after he had his experience playing air guitar on Jimmy Kimmel, and decided, wait a second, I want to be a musician in a movie. He's been a soldier and sniper. You know, he had a list of things, you know, iconic kind of characters he wanted to play. And so Bradley and I started with Will Fetters, you know, on a new version of the movie. We had gotten to the point, and, you know, where we wanted Lady Gaga, and we had gone through the Lady Gaga, you know, kind of testing and getting the studio on board, which was somewhat arduous, but, you know, we pulled it off. And then, you know, we were kind of, you know, all of a sudden really hustling between putting a music package together and getting the film prepped, and Bradley said, you know, why don't we bring Lynette in? And we met, and you know, she brought a lot to us in many ways, and that was about 2016, and we shot in 17, and we did okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
He and Bradley and I had worked together on The Place Beyond the Pines, and you know, he even though he was only acting in that, the thing about Bradley is that he's endlessly curious, and And I think every movie he's done, he's been preparing to direct this movie. He's never a passive participant in his films. He's always going into the edit room, and he's wants to know what everybody's doing on set, and he's a really active participant. And so that was my experience with him. And so then when he called me to say, I'm going to do A Star Is Born, and I hadn't seen either of the previous versions, so I literally went home that night and watched both of them back to back. And then I met with Bill and sort of like jumped right in, and it was the train was sort of moving, and it was like get on, and just it was like non-stop from that point on.
Given that interest that he had already shown in filmmaking, but he hadn't actually directed anything practically before.
Nothing.
You know, with these guys' films, I remember going and see them, and you kind of assured of, you know, they're going to be pretty good. But A Star Is Born, it was a total wild card. I remember going, and you don't know what to expect. And I'm interested in what point during the making of it you sort of felt, yeah, this is actually really, really going to work.
I mean, look, the truth is, I don't know that you ever know anything's really, really going to work until you see a cut of it. Like that's how I feel. Like, I think you can get a sense on set that you're creating something magical, and there's definitely days where you feel like, well, God, that's special, and as the screenplay evolves, you know. But as Billy said, you know, we were getting new pages, and Bradley changed the ending halfway through the film, halfway through production. He decided.
And the beginning.
And the beginning. I mean, really, we prepped an entirely different first 10 minutes, and then he shot something and said, actually, I think this should be the beginning. And so it sort of was constantly being reworked. So I don't think you really know. I think what you do have is faith in the participants. And I think that we have incredible faith in him. And I can, you know, I feel like I can speak for both of us, but I certainly knew that Bradley was always going to be a director. It was clear to me from working with him as an actor that this was absolutely his path. And, you know, he works harder than anybody. I don't feel like he doesn't sleep. You know, you wake up I have 3 small children. I wake up at 6 a.m. and there's already an email that was sent at 3 a.m. from him with like rewrites, or like, hey, can you get on the phone at 7 a.m. and after you've read the new script that I sent 2 hours ago. I mean, and that's happening on a weekly basis during pre-production, you know. So like, nobody works harder than him, so he makes you kind of raise your game, and he's very inspiring that way and incredibly collaborative. So all of those things just make for an incredible director, an incredible filmmaker. So you feel like you're in assured hands, but it was certainly a huge risk. You know, I mean, I love Lady Gaga. I think she's amazing, but we didn't know until she stepped on set if she was really going to be able to pull this off. And then it became evident very, very quickly that she's also the real deal as an actress, and like was bringing everything with her to do that, and like had fully prepped for it. But you know, you're still sort of waiting until the edit room to say, well, fuck, is this really going to work?
I agree. You'd never know, but I must say the day we did the test back in 16, May 20th, because I wasn't in Cannes for The Last Face, dodged out of that one, and we we were Gagas, and I have to say that I mean, you had worked with Bradley before. I hadn't worked with him in a film, and when he directed that test, I had gotten Janusz Kaminski to come in and shoot it for us as a favor, you know, and it was pretty obvious he had done his work, and his directing was not going to be the problem, you know. Many other things could have been, but that was not it.
Well, we have now also done work. Thank you very much indeed to all of our panellists today. It's been great to get to you. Thank you.